Hey guys, Leigh here with Tooth of the Arrow Broadheads. Today is arrow building day. This is part 2 of our 2-part video series on arrow building, so if you haven't seen the first part, make sure you check it out. That's all about spine matching and designing the perfect arrow, which we're now going to build today. So today we're going to start. I got 12 bear shafts here. We're going to go from the ground up. We're going to do arrow wraps. We're going to do 4 Fletch. We're going to do everything. So the first step, of course, is the spine matching, which we did in the first video. There's nothing hands-on about that. It's all done on a computer. But that is how we have come up with this build that we're going to do today. And using Archer's Advantage, that online software, which matches your arrow spine to your exact bow, we were able to design a mathematically perfect arrow for my bow. So that's the first step, of course. And now today we build arrows. So the first step in building arrows from a bear shaft is we need to clean them. Arrows, they might seem fine when you get them, but arrows often have a lot of dust, carbon dust on them, which just comes from the factory. So that'll be the first step. We're going to use some rubbing alcohol and a paper towel and clean them off. When arrows come out of the factory, they have a lot of carbon dust on them, and that will hinder the ability for your arrow wrap to stick to them. So I just use some rubbing alcohol and a paper towel. And you got to do this to every arrow, and I don't do it to the whole arrow. I just do it to the back end where I'm going to put the arrow wrap. But you can see some dust comes off. These ones are actually quite clean, but I've had arrows before that are really covered in dust. Let's just give each one a good wipe. A little bit more on that one. This is really important if you're using an arrow wrap or if you're just going to put your vanes straight on the carbon. It's really important. The cleaner the surface is, the better adhesion you'll get. And rubbing alcohol is good for a lot of things in archery, so it's a good thing to have in your shop. So now that all your arrows are clean, the next step will be to put a wrap on. Now to put an arrow wrap on, you need to have this type of material. An archery shop mat is what we call this, but in reality, all it really is a mouse pad material. It's that foamy kind of jelly mouse pad material. Now we make our own. You can get these on our website. These are nice because they're so big, but you can just get a mouse pad from an office supply store, and that works fine too. So to apply your wrap, don't have a knock on your arrow yet. Leave your shaft just totally bare, and you're going to take a wrap and lay it upside down on the mat. Now make sure there's enough room for the arrow to roll clean out of the way. Let's see if I can position this a little bit better for you to see it. So then what you're going to do is you're going to line up the back of the shaft right at the end. Make sure there's nothing in the way, which there is for me. You're going to line it up right at the end like that. Make sure it's an even, straight line. And then once you've got it set, you're just going to press firmly down on the shaft and give a quick roll like that. And then your arrow wrap is on there. I'd like to go and kind of press down the seam after, but that's all that's to it. You just want to go slowly and you want to be careful because it sucks when you screw these up. Sometimes packages of wraps will come with an extra because they expect that you might mess one up, and it happens all the time, so don't beat yourself up if you do it. Just be careful, take your time, line it up perfectly. I can see that my line is straight, it's right on the edge. Like that. Press firm and quick roll. That's it. Now there's a number of reasons you might want to use an arrow wrap. I like to use an arrow wrap. First of all, it makes your arrow more visible. You can see it better in flight, you can see impact better, you can see it better in targets, you can see it better in snow. Well, not these ones, these are white. But when you lose your arrow, if you ever do, or you shoot an animal, it makes recovering the arrow better, easier. So I use a white wrap, and you're gonna see I do everything in white. Now, that can be problematic for finding my arrow in snow, and I'll be the first to admit that. I have lost arrows in snow because I use white wrap and white vanes. But I use white wrap and white vanes because I like the ability for me to be able to see the blood. Shooting white wrap and vanes, I mean, first of all, I like the look. It's a cool look, but more importantly, it allows me to see what type of shot I made. You can read blood, you can tell if you made a liver shot, if you made a lung shot. Seeing that blood on white really helps you determine really how long you need to wait before going and tracking your animal. If you shoot like red vanes or red wrap, they look really cool, but it's really hard to read blood on that kind of a setup. But then, I mean, the upside of that is it's easier to find your arrows. The other upside for using a wrap versus not using a wrap is that if you ever shoot a vane or a vane rips off, you can peel the wrap off and the vanes will come off with it, and you're left with a perfectly clean arrow to redo underneath. If you just do put your vanes straight on the carbon, then you're left with a gluey mess, and you have to scrape the glue off, and it's actually not very good for the arrow to do that. So that's a reason to use a wrap, regardless of what color you decide to go with. So once you got your wraps on, the next step is to put your nocks in. You need your nocks in order to be able to fletch your arrows, which would be the next step. So nocks can be very tight. It's good that they're tight. You don't want them coming out, but to help get them in, I like to put just a little bit of string wax around the edge of the nock. And this just allows me to twist the nock a little bit as I'm pushing it in, and that just helps get it on, because these can be so tight. So I just push and twist and kind of work its way on. Might have to switch sides. And there you go. Wipe that little bit of excess wax away, and it's on. Make sure you don't like press down onto a table or anything, because you can break nocks that way, and your arrows won't come with extra nocks. So be careful with these. You do not want to break them. And most of the wax is going to squeeze out anyways, so don't worry about I've heard people say, oh, I don't want to add extra weight to your arrows, but the wax, but it's like, no, it's absolutely negligible amount of weight. So now comes the fun or not so fun part of the build, depending on who you ask. Now we're going to fletch. So first things first, I'm using a Bitzenberger. On the back of it, you have the settings to do a 4 fletch or a 3 fletch. Make sure you set this to 4 fletch. It'll be in the instructions. It's just a little screw that you screw in the 4 fletch setting and unscrew the 3 fletch setting, and then make sure you'll see on this is the knob, and inside is the nock receiver. There's a little R that needs to be facing up for your first vane. Not crucial for a 4 fletch, but for a 3 fletch it is pretty important, so that your cock vane remains the same. So now inside there's the little nock receiver, and you're going to put your nock in that like that. And now I like to put my vanes 1 inch from the end of the arrow. So I've measured that out on my Bitzenberger, and I made a little pen mark there. And this allows me to put my vein in knowing that it's at the same place every time. So I'm going to line it up, put it in like that. And then I'm going to take some glue. I just use liquid super glue and put less than you think you need. It's also really important that the glue is evenly spread. And I'll use, like, this is an old knife, I'll use the tip of an old knife here just to spread out the glue. It's really important that it's completely even. And then you're going to press, this is magnetic here, that's how it sticks. So you're going to press the base of the clamp down against the base of the of the jig, let it clamp on, and then press. Evenly press, and then you just leave it. Leave it for 10 seconds. It'll have time to set, but you don't want to leave it too long because there's still another step. That should be enough alone for it to set. You're going to squeeze the clamp, pull it off, and there you have a vein on your arrow now. Now, one thing that's really important is I will go and I'll press down along the top of the vein. This squeezes out air bubbles, and you'll see little bits of glue will come out the sides. And then after that, I just give a wipe down each side, clean off any excess glue, and that's it. That's one vein. Throw it back in your vise and give it a twist. And now you're just going to do that exact same thing again. So I can put my vein in like that, on the same exact mark as before. Less glue than you think you need. Spread the glue out. Press into the base of the jig. Let the magnet do its thing and push it in. Let it sit. Unclamp it. We're going to pull it off. Just press any air out of it. And give it a wipe. Wipe off any excess glue. And that's part of why you don't want to use too much glue, because when you do that press at the end, it's just going to squeeze it all out anyways. It's a very small amount of glue that actually bonds the vein, and then there's also there's a little bit of suction that occurs just through the shape of the base of the vein, and that's a big part of what keeps the vein on. Now there's one last thing I like to do before you put the glue away. It's called tipping and tailing. So what you're going to do is take your glue, and on the top or the front and the back of each vein that you just did, you're going to put just the smallest dot of glue. And we do this on every single arrow. The reason for this, the tipping is more important than the tailing, but it helps your arrows not rip off if they ever pass through your target or you shoot into something you don't mean to shoot into. And then putting a bit of glue on the back, the tailing part helps a lot for if you shoot an arrow into the back of your veins. It helps keep the vein from popping off that way. So just do that to every arrow, and then you are totally done with fletching. So now that we're completely done with the fletching end of the arrows, we have to cut them. So I've determined the cut length from using our Archer's Advantage system. and I'm going to be cutting my arrows to 28 inches. And remember that that length is always carbon to carbon, so it does not include the nock. Well, the way I like to typically do this is I do have a ruler here on my arrow saw, but I always like to double check it. So I'll put it at 28 and I give it a little spin just to mark up the carbon down here. And then I can actually take a measurement before I cut and before the arrow saw is turned on. Tell me I'm just a touch long on 28. Yeah, right there, perfect. So then you just gotta lock that end in real tight. And now we're gonna cut. It's really important that you're spinning the arrow towards you while you do it. You don't wanna push the arrow too far into the saw blade. You want it to just barely touch and you spin as it cuts its way through. These cut really easily if you do it like that. And then the other thing is you wanna always keep constant pressure on the nock, pushing into this little holder here, because if you're spinning and your arrow comes forward, you're totally gonna screw up that cut. So pushing backwards this way the whole time and a light even spin in this motion, top down towards you. So that's it, let's do some cutting. So that's it. Now, one more thing that I forgot to mention before I started cutting is when it does finally cut off, I like to push what's left of the arrow into the blade to let it square off a little bit. Now, this isn't going to square your arrow, but it will help, and it does minimize the amount of squaring you have to do later. So when you cut, it's gonna pop off right there, and then I just push it in and give it a little spin so that the side of the blade can start to square off that arrow. So now that we've got our arrows cut, the next step is to square them off and do a dry fitting of all your components. But before we do that, remember from the beginning, carbon dust is bad and you're gonna have a lot of it on the end of the arrow after cutting them. So I just do a few spins on a paper towel with each arrow like that to get all that dust off, and you'll see when it's totally clean, it's this is pretty important. So once you've got all of those clean, now we're going to do dry fittings of our components. This is a 2-piece component from Ethics Archery, and we're going to do squaring. So this is a cool tool I have. This is an arrow spinner, and then if I add this piece at the end, it turns my spinner into an arrow squaring device. If you're getting into arrow building, this is an absolutely crucial tool. Oftentimes I will find that they do come off square from my saw, so I will just do a dry fit. There's no glue on here. Just test your components out. Sometimes it can be tricky to get the broadhead in there without glue. It's gonna wanna spin on you, so you can just set it up like this. But I will put, I'll take a broadhead that I know is square and do a test spin like that. So unfortunately, the annoying part is you have to take that off, but then we'll do a spin here and see. That one's actually spinning really well. I could get it a little more square. So with that, then I'll just put that one to the side. I know it needs a little bit of squaring. And you're just gonna do this with all of them. See, that one's bang on. That one doesn't need any squaring, so that one's good to go, and I'll put it in a separate pile over here. And I'll just do this with all of them. That one definitely needs some squaring. And what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for wobble in the tip of the broadhead, and that will totally impact your flight. You know, probably 4 out of 5 times that people say their bow doesn't shoot fixed blade broadheads well, it's because their arrows aren't squared properly. And you know, I've seen guys who do square their arrows, but they just, you know, they give it a quick little square and they call it good. They don't do a test fit. So you always need to test fit every single component with every single arrow before you go ahead and glue. Now, I will also point out here that sometimes, for whatever reason, different components will fit with different arrows. Like this arrow didn't spin, but it was close. So I will sometimes play around and just take a different component on that same arrow. And I have seen that sometimes that a different match will make them spin. I'm gonna cut myself if I'm not careful there. See, that happened right there. Now this one spins perfect. So I know that this one is a good match. I'm gonna leave it. And then actually before, I know that this one was a good match for this one, so I'm just gonna leave it like that. But basically that's the process. You're gonna go through all of them. And then when you find one that isn't square and it doesn't spin square with any of your components, then you're going to actually have to square it. So to do that, you need an arrow squaring device. There's a few on the market. This one I really like. I think I got it from, Fire Knock. So you're just gonna put it on the tool and give it a spin. This is a little bit of sandpaper that's stuck on the end there. And you're just gonna give it a spin, and I can actually see carbon dust coming off. Remember to always clean after you do that stuff. We'll find another component. And do a test spin. That one's spinning perfectly now, just like that. So that's gonna be the process. Make sure every arrow has its proper matched component and that they're spinning with a broadhead. And once you have that all sorted out, you can go on to the next step. So then before you start to glue your inserts, one thing I like to do is on the inside of your shaft, I like to scratch it up just a little bit. So you can use, this is called a carbon prep tool. This one's a little bit too wide for me to fit in these shafts, but it would work on a bigger arrow. I just take like a really small Allen key and just score up the inside just a little bit, but really not much. You don't want to do too much of that. Put a Q-tip in there to clean out any little bit of dust. As always, dust really harms the ability for anything to stick in archery. So now we can start gluing. So I like, there's a number of things you can use. Any 2-part epoxy is gonna work well. You wanna use one that is long setting. Don't use the quick set 5-minute stuff. If you can find a 12 or 24 hour, that's great. I even like this JB Weld. This is it's a steel hardener, so I've never really had any issues with this. So just on a scrap piece of cardboard or anything you have around, you're gonna do even parts of both tubes, like that. And then I just take, this is a piece of arrow that just came off of one of these arrows. Just gonna mix it, make sure it's really, really thoroughly mixed. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna cover most of this post in glue, in epoxy, sorry. You don't want too much, of course. It will be important here that for each post you try to get a similar amount on, and then you're just gonna put it in. I like to twist as I put it in. It spreads the epoxy out quite well, and then you're gonna have that excess on the end. Just gonna take a paper towel and do a roll to get it off like that. Make sure there's nothing left. Oops. And that's it. Now with my system here, you don't glue on these sleeves. They do just come freely on and off. They are held on by whatever point you have. But I do caution you don't screw on your points yet, because if you screw them on too early, you can cause the bond that's happening in here to break, and you'll weaken this. You'll probably lose an insert down the road. So at this point, you know this thing's gonna be square. You know it's perfect. You know it's glued. The arrow is complete. Once you do this to all your arrows, you're gonna stand them upside down like this overnight, at least 12 hours. I always give them 24, and then you're done. That's the entire arrow building process. So that's gonna be it, guys. I got a whole bunch more arrows here I gotta finish up, but that is the process. I hope you guys learned something. I'm going to give you one last tip. One thing I like to do just for fun and to track my progress as an aero builder, once these are done and dried, I like to weigh out every single one and write down the weights and then find the difference between the heaviest and the lightest. And over time, I like to see how close I can get that weight. If you're within a couple grains from your heaviest to your lightest arrow, that's really impressive. And you're not going to notice that at all in the performance. So thank you guys for watching this whole process. It was really fun to do on camera, and I hope you guys learned something. If you have any questions, comments, or future video recommendations, please let us know in the comments below.